In the world of business building, we often wonder if it could get any more complicated. GRC, GDPR, ESG, zero carbon, green hydrogen, cybersecurity, and big data. Let's not forget the long funding processes that can make you crazy. If you are a world changing founder and innovator, how do you connect with the support that you need to move ahead? Well, this podcast puts the people, planet, profit through partnerships theory to action by helping you to see opportunities in every episode to create a meaningful partnership. The innovators, experts, and diplomats we interview are all looking for partners, and that could be you. No time like the present to find out. So welcome to Frontrunners Innovate with your host, global business developer, Mary Kurek. Hello, everyone. Our subject today is innovation and the world that surrounds it, from finance to commercialization. We'll talk about entrepreneurship and impact investing as well. All subjects near and dear to us at Frontrunners Development, as you know. I'm your host, Mary Kurek, president of Frontrunners Development, a global business development company that connects business impact partners. My special guest today is Lina I'm gonna mess up the name, Lina, but say it for us. Say it for us.
Constantinovici.
Constantinovici, okay, of Innovation 4.4, based in San Francisco. Lina has spent over 20 years immersed in innovation in public, private, and NGO sectors, covering all angles as an entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, thought leader, and global strategist. She's a frequent speaker on the subject, and having done so in over 650 summits. Girl, you are on fire. Including a Nobel Prize Summit, the UN and NASA Centennial Challenge launch. Because we wanted to make the best use of Lina's time, we put together a couple of really cool co-hosts. Both of them know each other, actually. And that would be Ian Parker, he is the CEO of Healixa. And he'll talk to us a little bit about what his innovation is. He's on that path. And we have also Ambassador Richard Swett, who's co-founder and CEO of Climate Prosperity Enterprise Solutions. We'll find out more about what their big project is in just a minute. So I want to say welcome to everybody. This is hot topic time for all of us. So let's get started by getting to know a little bit more about the co-hosts. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ian, first. So if you will introduce yourself and what Healixa is all about.
Thank you, Mary. So Healixa is a technology company. Our focus is on sustainability technologies, technologies that will help us keep us in balance with the planet around us. The key technology we have that we're commercializing now is a water harvesting technology. It's the first deposition water harvesting technology in the world. And what it allows us to do is freeze water vapor directly out of the air, which means we can harvest water pretty much anywhere. And that's what we do.
And you are in pilot or heading to pilot right now, right?
Heading to pilots right now, and then we're preparing for manufacturing in early 24. Exactly when will be announced here soon. We're engrossed in the operational details as we speak.
Okay, very good. Ambassador Richard Swett, you'll introduce what you do.
Great. Well, it's nice to meet you, Lina. It's good to see you, Ian. We're all glad to be together. And I just got off a great phone call where we are working on developing a platform that models the building of sustainable solar communities. Obviously, water supply is an important part of that, Ian. So we'll always have reasons to talk in the near future. But we're working in Africa, we're working in Central America, and we're spending a great deal of time designing communities for locations where there is no economic activity. So we're taking consumers and turning them into consumers. My background in architecture had always made me interested in this, but I've also served as a member of Congress and also as U.S. ambassador to Denmark. So I kind of have the political international contacts down that give me access. And then what we're doing is we're using this modeling template or platform. We call it the Prosperity Platform. that helps us to show these people in these typically rural places, how they can realize economic sustainability and prosperity through ownership, through the introduction of technologies like what Ian represents. And we're doing that in Malawi, Sudan, South Sudan, and Nigeria right now. And we're getting close to realizing our first implementation.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Yes. Big congrats. Lina, we're going to turn to you now, because I think what we need is a little bit of background on you and what brought you into the work that you're doing. And then we'll talk about the seat that you're sitting in terms of the business at hand. So give us a little whirlwind tour of where you came from.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Mary, Ian, and Richard, for having me on today. I'm really delighted to be here and have a conversation with you about some of our work. So my work in this space started in 1994. I landed in San Francisco in the midst of the dot boom and had a front row seat to the boom and bust. Worked with some of the largest enterprise software companies at the time.
So this was right out of elementary school?
You're very kind. This was right out of university. I landed here, and it was an interesting time. And someday when I retire, perhaps I'll write a book about it. There's a lot to unpack there, I think. However, in 2002, I had this realization that how I lived my life personally, the values with which my life was informed by, weren't represented in the work that I was doing. I felt that my work and who I was in the world were very disconnected. And so I embarked on the journey to find out, what would it look like to wake up every day and feel like who I am and what I do in the world are aligned. What I mean by that, just briefly, I'm from Romania originally. Grew up in Romania under Ceausescu, for those of you that are old enough to remember that, and then left at the age of 13 with my father, spent 8 years in a refugee camp in Austria before coming to the US. So by the time I arrived in the US, I experienced 4 different educational systems, 4 different political systems, 4 different socioeconomic systems. So it began to shape my view of the world as systems at play that produce certain outcomes rather than just how things are. And I mentioned that because it's informed a lot of the work I have done and that we are doing today. So back to Silicon Valley days, I embarked on a journey to then find that alignment. And what I mean by personal values, I was, buying organic food 30 years ago, not wearing polyester, making all the personal choices that I could to really make the best decision in every way that I could in my life. And I wanted my work to represent that as well. And it took a couple of years. I found Presidio Graduate School, which at the time was one of only 3 what were called green MBAs or sustainable MBAs at the time. And I enrolled, and that was life-changing. So the last 16 years of my work have been informed by the work at Presidio Graduate School at the time, which was founded by very visionary sustainability thought leaders, and with this idea that you could reframe and evolve the traditional idea of an MBA to really enable change makers to use the tools of business to produce better outcomes, let's say. And at Presidio, there are really 2 key ideas or frameworks that have informed all of my work since. One was scenario planning. I had the good fortune of studying scenario planning, learning scenario planning from one of the forefathers of scenario planning, Jay Ogilvy. And the other was biomimicry. And, Ian alluded to it earlier. A couple hundred years ago, we have started to build solutions to meet our needs that go against nature and principles of nature and how nature works. So if we got back to designing solutions that are aligned with nature, we might have better outcomes. So looking at biomimicry, or how nature works, and that's actually what the name of our organization alludes to. Innovation 4.4 means innovation aligned with 4.4 billion years of our planetary systems. So this alignment and looking at how nature works, I was really interested in how do we build an economy that creates conditions conducive to life the way nature does. And what does that mean at an organizational level? How do we build a startup, a company that becomes that kind of economic actor? So some of these kinds of ideas and thoughts and early projects came out of that thinking and out of some of the learnings at Presidio. What also evolved from that is many of my colleagues were really focused on water and energy, which is very, very important, of course. But I also realized that unless we solve for the material science constraint, unless we shift our production and manufacturing system to be non-toxic and have a different, how do I say this? How do we evolve our production and manufacturing system to be more sustainable and meet our needs in a better way? And so material science was a really key interest, which, as you'll hear about later, took us to a lot of our work we're doing today with plastics and green chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
So after Presidio, I've done work in 4 areas. The one I've spent 90% of my time has been innovation, early stage technology, commercialization, impact investing, and so on. And I'll mention the other 3 just in a sentence or 2 briefly. The other 3 were sustainability advising and consulting. I worked with large companies like Walmart, like W Hotels. I designed the sustainability strategy for W Hotels that became the global Starwood strategy. And so a lot of work in that space with various companies, supply chain standards for Walmart's apparel suppliers, and so on. And then the third category of activity was designing curricula for universities on systems thinking, impact investing, biomimicry, entrepreneurship, innovation, and so on. And the fourth has been doing large-scale strategic planning processes utilizing scenario planning as a methodology on the future of business education, the future of the healthcare safety net in Detroit, and many other similar projects. The innovation piece, though, became, you could accurately say, an obsession. When I did a project with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab back in 2007, a colleague at Presidio was working there at the time, and I was asked to participate in heading up this project that was looking at the rate of commercialization of technologies coming out of the lab and why it was so low. 2 to 5% on average is the average for most universities, national labs, etc. And this is 2 to 5% of patented technologies. And this became very interesting to me because, well, for 3 reasons. One, you cannot have a growing, resilient economy if you don't have a healthy innovation function within that economy. So from a macroeconomic perspective, it's really important to get this right, if you will. Then from a societal return on investment perspective, we spend billions of dollars in the US on enabling these technologies to be patented, yet I would certainly say 2 to 5% is a suboptimal return on that investment. And then the third reason that I deeply cared about there are technologies that are sitting on the shelves of universities, national labs, that could be saving thousands of places in the world from drought and meeting many, many other needs that, again, are not providing any value to society, which is suboptimal. So I became, you could accurately say, obsessed with how do we actually understand the system's dynamics sufficiently that are producing these suboptimal outcomes? How do we understand the market failures around early stage technology commercialization so that we can shift those outcomes and have more value from the human creativity and ingenuity that is producing this innovation, and derive more value for society from that? And to put it in other words, how do we remove the obstacles to early stage commercialization, whether they be funding, regulatory, many obstacles that are producing the suboptimal outcomes that we're seeing currently, have been seeing since I started looking at this issue. So this is sort of how it all began. I looked at 1,600 incubator and accelerator models to understand what works about them, what doesn't, where they fail to deliver unintended value. And so that informed then in 2012, Startup Nectar, which was the first biomimetic technology incubator that I launched. And we were focused on water, energy, and material science primarily, innovation. And in 2013, we got an award from NASA in the showcase for best solutions for planetary sustainability. And this is where I realized that as effective as we were with some of the early stage programs we were launching, partnering with universities to actually commercialize technologies, that unless we solved for the early stage funding gap, we could only be so successful. And this is where I started to get involved in impact investing and really looking at the ecosystem of funding and looking at where the gaps were and where the mismatch at times between size of check and needed and size of check that certain kinds of funders are able to write, and all those sorts of nuances and dynamics. And one of the realizations as I became a part of a community of family offices, I realized that family offices had a very important role to play in funding the technologies that the world most needs, because family offices don't think in terms of quarterly returns or 5 to 7 year returns, but think in terms of legacy. And that is a fundamentally different way of thinking about capital. And for those who may not know what I'm talking about when I say family office, a family office is a family that has more than 100 million in wealth. That is the point at which economically it makes sense for the family to set up its own investment entity rather than have it managed by one of the bank wealth managers or other wealth managers. So when I say family offices, what that means really is families with more than 100 million in wealth. Mm-hmm. That was a very good, very, very long introduction, so I apologize for the long monologue, but hopefully that gives some context for where some of the things we'll be talking about come from.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a break at this point and see if the guys have any questions that we've already shared with us. Either one of you?
Well, I'll jump in. First and foremost, thank you for the long introduction, because it really gives me, and I think probably all of us, a good context of your evolution. I start out by saying that I spent several years in Romania working on meter technology. Back when the wall came down, I was partnered with a Romanian and we were trying to address the corrupt metering practices where people were stealing electricity and whatnot, and there was a tremendous need for establishing infrastructure that would measure and track where all this stolen electricity was being taken and used. But beyond that, I also was curious, are you familiar with Clayton Christensen's book, The Prosperity Paradox? How innovation lifts nations out of poverty. And you're nodding your head, yes, but that's kind of one of the things that describes the process that I'm involved in. My partner and I are working on a model that he originally implemented in Alaska with the Alaskan tribal corporations, where there's an opportunity to partner from the bottom up, people at the bottom of the economic pyramid with multi-internationals in some instances, that help them to grow businesses and become sustainable in that way, as opposed to trickle down or top down investment. And so what we are doing is trying to create these sustainable communities where that bottom up kind of investment exists and operates. I bring up Clay just because he wrote about how innovation has to operate at the center of that. And obviously that's a word that is very familiar in your vocabulary. But the point is that the innovation has to take place among non-consumers, as he calls them, which gives them an opportunity to produce for themselves. And I think that's what we are finding, that wherever we go, anyone who is setting up technology for people to work at a low cost level that is being purchased out of community, out of country, out of continent by wealthier upper middle class societies, that is not a sustainable equation. But if you work right there with the community and you employ the community, and that community ultimately feeds itself, if you will. We do a lot with agriculture and greenhouse smart farming, but that kind of implementation is critical to the sustainability of those economic engines that ultimately create the economies of these emerging communities in Africa where we're working. But I don't know, Ian, I don't know if you have anything that you want to jump in. I could talk for an hour, but I think I should share
Lina
the
wants
time.
to say something.
Just
Yeah.
a quick response to that. I would love to learn more about your work in Alaska. It's a wonderful place to work. We actually have collaborated with Alaska Conservation Foundation for a long time, and I've spoken at the Renewable Energy Conference there several times. So would love to learn more. And regarding Clay Christensen, I highly recommend his books if you haven't come across them. I've had the pleasure of meeting him in Geneva at the International Strategic Management Conference. I was doing a keynote on applying biomimicry to strategy for large companies, and he was also one of the speakers. So he's certainly made a significant contribution to these conversations. And
yeah, the book I mentioned is the last one that he wrote before he passed away. He died of cancer back in 2019, but a dear man with a great mind for the kind of innovation that is necessary to help establish new economic models all over the continents.
Indeed, yes. I had a chance to meet him in 2012, so it was a few years before he passed away.
So Ian, you're on mute.
I'm curious to know how you start solving the problem of getting technologies or getting that success rate higher from a technology standpoint. I know what our journey has been, and you know like for example, our journey, we found the deposition water harvesting patents in Mexico. It's an American who wrote them, but he filed them in Mexico, and they were they were at a very early stage concept phase. So it took a science eye and a business eye to see that, right? And there wouldn't be a lot of funding that would go after that at that moment in time. It took a unique group of people to go, okay, wait a second, I see this. I can see where this goes, and this is definitely worth the effort. But it took a very unique group of people to do that, not just myself, but the other people on this team. So one of the problems we had early on, I would say we're starting to break through that right now, was funding, right? Getting people interested at that moment in time. We battled through it. There's a certain amount of tenacity within this group that just allowed us to continue to battle through it. But it was painful. And there wasn't that early stage gap. It was either we talk to a venture fund that says, okay, yes, we'll do it, but we're going to fund it with a lot of money and we're going to give you a really low valuation, in which case we go, well, I didn't really want to sign up to work for you. But that wasn't my goal. Or you find another way to fund it through friends and family. And I have a lot more friends and family than I had when I started.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's a real battle. So I'm curious to see how you bridge that, or how you start bridging that, because that is, if you can solve that problem where you can get that access, easier, and help, what I've also found is that from a technology standpoint, engineers and scientists aren't always the best product people. So, combining product people and engineers and scientists, and then giving that group access to funding, there's a lot of complexity there, right? So I'm curious to see how you start bridging that, or where you see the success in starting to bridge that.
So in about 2011, 2012, I was doing a lot of work looking at the perception of risk, right? Because part of what's driving the dearth of capital at that stage is the perception of risk, not necessarily the actual risk, but the perception of risk. And that delta between perceived risk and actual risk produces the constraint in capital available, let's say. So I'll say more about that, but just to go back to some of the things you mentioned, I often get asked, when you did that 18-month research project with LBL, what was the conclusion? Why is it that we have only 2 to 5% commercialization? And one of the things in talking with tech transfer, with some of the innovators, with funders, etc., to understand this ecosystem, one of the realizations was that most researchers, there are a few exceptions, but the majority have become researchers because they love being researchers and being in the lab, and they have neither the skills, the networks, or the desire to launch a company around the innovation that they have been working on for 10, 15, 20 years sometimes. And that's not trivial to understand, right? So then whose job does it become to do that work? And what is the role of the innovator, let's say, in that new company? And it's not just launching a startup. Even to articulate a value proposition to, let's say, a market leader to sell the patent or license it, that requires an articulation of what is the market potential, what are the applications, what are the economics of that. Those are skill sets that are not usually present in someone who's been a PhD researcher in a particular field that they're brilliant in, let's say. So some of those questions were what I was looking at in the early phases to really understand, why is it that we have the outcomes that we do? And in terms of funding and perceived risk, I actually hosted a whole conference on this at NASA Ames in 2015, I think it was. to look at the delta between perceived risk and actual risk. So I actually invited some of the traditional VCs in the Valley, and the language used was one recognizable by more traditional funders, let's say. It was called the Risk and Value Creation Forum. And it was all about impact and sustainability and biomimicry, even though we didn't use any of those words, right? Because if I did, the perception would be, oh, this conference is not for me. I don't do impact. I don't do sustainability. However, when we presented 14 companies with biomimetic technology solutions, every single one of them, and it was, by the way, standing room only, we had to turn folks away. Every single investor who came said, I'm looking into this space now. This is very interesting because of how it was framed and presented and so on. So the framing matters, the belief, it is a belief because it's not fact. We know that if you are investing in impact, that is concessionary capital, that you are not going to get market rate returns. And there are all kinds of studies that have debunked this myth and so on, but it still persists, particularly in more traditional finance circles. The fact that doing impact is philanthropy. It's not real investing, quote unquote. So there are all these kinds of beliefs that have gotten in the way of commercializing the technologies that we need. One of the other realizations you asked early on in your question, how we look at this is from a systems perspective, meaning it's not how do you increase the rate of, how do you accelerate an individual technology or the rate of technologies, just have more technologies. That's helpful, but insufficient. What we looked at is from a systems perspective, how do you ensure that we actually have an innovation system that works towards the goals that are going to help us meet our needs, human needs, in the timeline that we have. Meaning, it took 40 years for commercialization of solar, from technology in the lab to fully globally deployed, 40. We have maybe 5 to 10 years to bring solutions to market that are going to solve for climate, the health of our oceans, toxicity that's affecting our health, and many, many other challenges we're facing. We don't have 40 years to solve those and to bring innovation to bear as a component of the solution. Of course, we need many other things. We need legislation that's aligned with those goals. We need education. We need many, many things, but we cannot get there without innovation, without the role that innovation must play in helping us reach those outcomes. And so that is why I founded Innovation 4.4. Our mission is to accelerate the commercialization of technologies that matter. And what that means is to accelerate them closer to that 5 to 10 year timeline as opposed to a 40-year timeline. So all the programs that we launch are interventions to reduce the time and capital needed to get to that next milestone, again, for technologies that matter. Not necessarily for the next food delivery app and so on, but for technologies that really are critical to our life on this planet.
I'd be curious to hear your response about the difference between philanthropy, giving, and investment, because as someone who's working in Africa in particular, we are finding, number one, that the model that was established in Alaska, and I'll share some of this information with you offline when we can talk in greater depth. But my partner found in Alaska that people were motivated when they had skin in the game, when they were invested in the platform, when they were part of the team that was putting forward the service or the activity, or the technology for that matter. And that's what we have tried to incorporate into our development as well. And to do that, you have to operate as a for-profit platform. You cannot operate as a nonprofit, grant-driven, sponsored, whatever you want to call it, kind of activity, because you have a very different human mindset. You talk about the understanding the difference between scientists and innovators and the business people who turn the product. And Ian was also mentioning the challenge that he came across in dealing with those kinds of things. So I'm just curious to understand, Lina, are you oriented more towards the for-profit investment oriented operations, or are you also dealing with some of the philanthropic type organizations and the approach that they have towards finance?
The short answer is both, in that we look at everything from a systems perspective. And so when we look at a technology, excuse me, that has that important role to play in the world, there are different stages of funding that require different types of funders and different types of capital. And that is part of what we have worked to do, is to help entrepreneurs understand that the choices aren't just government grants and VCs, that there's a much larger ecosystem of potential funders that are appropriate at different stages, in different geographies, in different kinds of projects. There's no one size fits all. And understanding the nuances and the complexity is really helpful. So, for example, if you're in the UK, Innovate UK has tremendous programs for startups. And they even have, I think it's called EIN. It's a program where if you are an early stage investor, the government essentially guarantees 70% of that investment. So if the company isn't successful, you get 70% of that back. So it's really incentivizing and again, decreasing that perception of risk.
Right.
And not just perception, but in this case,
it's a reality, yes.
Exactly. So depending on geography, there are different kinds of programs available, different kinds of capital that's looking to go to different kinds of projects, different sectors, etc. So understanding, evolving beyond a more simplistic understanding of, VCs as the go-to, and if you don't fit in that framework, then it's really difficult. So just one example, I mentioned material science. There are thousands of funds in the Valley, and not that the Valley is the only place where investment exists, but just as an example, of those, only five, you can count them on one hand, fund material science innovation. 1,000. So if you're an early stage material science company, and by the way, I've spoken to all five and asked them the question that I always ask when you say early stage, how early stage is that? Or what do you mean by that? And they all said, oh, well, post revenue. So if you're an early stage material science company, how do you get to revenue? Who funds that early stage development for really key, really important innovations? Let's say bioplastics, alternatives to petroleum-based plastics, and green chemistry, etc. There is a dearth of capital in certain sectors, even at the VC level, let alone the phases before that. So then the question of, are there appropriate government grants for what you're doing? One of the ways in which I think there's a great opportunity to integrate different forms of capital is again with the family office. the family office has the opportunity to fund through grants very, very early stage idea level innovation. So I was on the board of Schmidt Marine Technology Partners, which is part of the Schmidt Family Foundation, Eric and Wendy Schmidt's foundation. And that particular entity was focused on funding very early stage ocean innovation, 50K grants before business plan or any of that. So then the family office has the opportunity to fund at the next stage through the impact investing fund that the foundation has. Then from there, there's an opportunity to fund from the family office side through either MRIs, through various kinds of vehicles. And even on the foundation side, you can do a PRI for a for-profit entity, and then you can also invest from the corpus of from the endowment of the foundation through an MRI or mission-related investment. So understanding all these different kinds of mechanisms is really important. And the opportunity for family offices is to have that integrated approach where you can fund through a philanthropic vehicle, the very early stage development, come in through an impact investing vehicle at the next stage, and then from your family office side in follow on, let's say B round and beyond. So there's an opportunity for that integrated approach that actually provides an efficiency, because you know this company now from the beginning. Your diligence process was that first 50K check, and being able to be part of the growth of that company to the next stage. If that.
And how do you derive your revenue from your services? How is your relationship structured in this arrangement?
Sure. So I realized very early on when I started doing this work, I wanted to put all of our activities under one umbrella, all the things that needed doing in the space. And I found that that was really challenging for legal reasons and so on, mixing philanthropic capital with non-philanthropic capital. And so the way we are set up now is Innovation 4.4 is a 501c3, and it does all of the work, the field building work, all of the work that would fit under a nonprofit umbrella.
Sure.
And through a couple of different funds that I'm part of, we do some of the investment work and so on. So I'll share briefly one that we've just structured. We'll be announcing soon over the weekend at Climate Week. One of the, again, with the mission of accelerating this process, there's a great deal of inefficiency in how especially deep tech innovation companies are funded. So we've partnered with a large project developer that has been piloting projects under the umbrella of, let's say, $1 billion project. They'll pilot a new technology, which is really valuable for these companies and really interesting. The other value is they can now side by side benchmark the performance of that new technology against existing best-in-class technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So I approached them because we have a plastics annihilation technology that we're working with, and I thought that would be a great opportunity to pilot. But then proposed to them and said, well, you're taking all the early stage risk, but not really capturing the upside from the investment in funding these pilots. So long story short, we're now setting up a fund that is going to fund these early stage pilots. And now you have a built-in pilot project partner. You've got a built-in customer that can scale that technology very quickly. They've done 35 billion of projects so far. and you've got that benchmarking against best-in-class technologies. So you're now fast tracking that whole process for that company by 5 to 8 years by having this kind of approach and this kind of setup in a fund. So they're putting in some of the early capital that they would have spent anyway on piloting these technologies, and inviting some of their partners and a few family offices to participate. So that's yet another example of how you can fast track the process, remove some of the barriers. I mean, I've worked with companies where, let's say, material science innovation, we approached the CEO of a large automotive company. So we started at the CEO level. It took 4 years to actually get to the point where anything material happened. So it's an inordinate amount of time that it takes for all sorts of reasons. And so the more we can put in place structures that are specifically designed and geared to ensure that innovation is fast-tracked as much as possible in an appropriate way for everybody involved.
Oh, Lina, I wish I met you a couple of years ago.
Well, it's never too late. So
I'm glad to be meeting you right now.
I'm very happy to meet you right now. Wish I met you 2 years ago.
well,
But yes,
happy to help in
it's-
any way I can. This is there's a lot to do, and again, there's a reason why SDG Sustainable Goal 17 exists. It's going to take collaboration and all of us to get it done. And I try to do my small part, and if we all do our part, hopefully it'll be enough. So we all have.
you have a very interesting part to play here. I can tell you we've run into all the challenges that you're mentioning today. Everything from
similar.
everything from taking, the science and somebody handing me a book that says the triple point of water, and I go, okay, I can't explain that to the public. So let me try to write that in English, right? So taking the science and actually translating it to a message that resonates, all of those things, the funding that you talked about, dealing with large companies, and we're still in those conversations. We're probably about 2 years into that 4-year time frame that you talked about. So it's a slow burn, and it takes a lot of effort. And if you have a way to help people navigate those waters, especially on the funding side, that's tremendous.
Well, one of the things that I'm realizing I didn't quite answer your question earlier, Richard. So how we are funded on the Innovation 4.4 side.
Right.
We were launched in 2015, and it was right after attending COP21 in Paris. I realized that this agreement we've made as a human community towards a future that we want to build together, again, necessitated technological innovation. It was taken education, regulations, all sorts of things, but necessitated technological innovation as a contribution. And that's when I launched Innovation 4.4 with the mission to accelerate commercialization that matters, meaning commercialization that can help us reach the goals of the Paris Agreement, as well as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And
we are falling far short on these goals right now.
We are. I was just at the UN last week, and we are now halfway through. So they were announced in 2015. They were supposed to be met by 2030. We are 15% there.
Yeah.
And we're halfway there in terms of timeline. So yes, far short. Also true of the NDCs. For those of you that are not familiar, the NDCs are the nationally determined commitments that each country has made to the United Nations and has to report to every year on their progress. again, far short of reaching the goals that have been set out there. So this is why accelerating commercialization of technologies that can help us reach these goals is critical, because we are not on track at this point. But in terms of how we're funded, we were initially launched with a grant from a family foundation or office. I've funded some of the work we've done as well, and then we've had another family office that's also funded a lot of the work we've done. We also have some earned income from various activities that we do. We have started about 3 years ago doing specific strategically designed events for family offices, recognizing that family offices have such an important role to play. So our goal is to inspire families to do more, deploy more capital towards both philanthropic capital and impact investing capital towards impact, to educate them on how to do more, and to present deeply vetted opportunities to have access to. So I've diligenced over 16,000 early stage technology companies in the last decade and a half or so.
You just answered my next question.
Okay. I probably see about 1,000 decks a year. We select 10 to 15 companies that we feel have an outsized potential for impact in various areas. And of course, we'll look at the team and their ability to actually deliver on intended goals. And then we put them in front of family offices alongside experts and so on. So for example, we just had a family office summit at Climate Week last Monday. We're an official partner of UNFCCC. We had an innovation exhibit in the Blue Zone at COP26. So we had UNFCCC there speaking about COP, the upcoming COP28 in Dubai. We had the UN, we had the Smithsonian that we collaborate with closely. We had the National Academy of Sciences. We had the astrophysics lab at Harvard that's doing some really amazing things. They have 850 astrophysicists, and they've now turned all that equipment that they used to look for life on other planets in the universe to look at, for example, they've built an app where you can actually see the level of pollution above your house. You can enter your coordinates, and it'll tell you what the level of pollution is. So we, bring really inspirational, amazing work like that in front of key families. We had the gentleman who structured the first green bond, talking about the role of green bonds in funding the SDGs, and so on. And then we had a showcase of 6 companies with very diverse solutions, from future of work to carbon to all sorts of other solutions related to the UN SDGs. And so we do these strategic gatherings at COP, at UNGA, at the World Economic Forum. We did one specifically on ocean solutions last year at the United Nations Ocean Conference in Lisbon. So our goal is to really, again, remove some of those barriers with family offices. It's to create a trusted environment where we have relationships with families. They know our track record in diligencing companies, etc. And it's an environment that where these companies can rise above the noise that most family offices get 200 decks a day, right? So how do you actually facilitate an environment where you can build real relationships? And that's how things happen in the world, as I think all of us would agree. So that's one way, that's one program we have for companies. We also work with governments around the world to, again, help provide the tools, the expertise that many governments lack access to meet their NDCs. So we'll be doing a large gathering in Dubai for COP28 for governments and help them access some of these tools needed to more efficiently meet the goals before them. And then we work with corporations as well to help them access innovation. We have a prize for ocean plastic pollution, for example. We'll be announcing it in a couple of weeks. This year, we've partnered with a company out of UK that's a sustainable footwear company. And they have this new business model they're launching where you can get your feet 3D scanned and then get 3D printed shoes to your exact feet. And of course,
wow.
they didn't want to make these out of, ABS plastic that would go in the landfill and so on. So they've approached us, and we will be announcing in a couple of weeks the winner. And then within 5 to 6 months, there will be a product in the marketplace. So again, we use this mechanism of a prize to make innovation from around the world visible. Find a partner where they don't have to now spend the next 4 years looking for a commercial partner to see if someone would commercialize what they've developed. We bring that partner in so that they can immediately go into commercialization. And then since this company is a market leader in their space, then get the attention of others in that industry and other adjacent industries. So those are some examples of.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, very helpful. How big is your team?
Right now, there are 3 of us on our team, so it's pretty small.
You keep yourselves very busy.
Yeah, I can volunteer.
There you go.
We're looking to grow the team because we've had, especially now after Climate Week, we've had a lot of new partners and a lot of new opportunities that are coming our way. We also do a lot on the education side. And I want to mention this because I think it's really important that culture shift to accelerate the adoption of innovation is a really key part. Innovation in itself is important, but not sufficient to get us to that 5 to 10 year timeline. So one of the things we're working on, for example, on that front, we've partnered with one of the leading VR training, corporate training companies that not only develops VR training modules, but they track the learning throughout the process in really interesting ways. They can see where your eye is going and so on. So with them, we're developing a VR scenario to teach people about plastic pollution in an experiential way. So where you actually get to experience the beauty of the ocean, and then all of a sudden you're swimming in a soup of plastic, of toxic plastic. And then there are solutions, what you can do, and so on. So it's taking that medium and giving somebody an experience they will never forget and learnings that they will share with others. So we have a few key partners to get this module in every high school in the United States and beyond, into a museum in Washington, D.C. and in the Ocean Wing. So we're on track to be able to have 100 million people see this VR scenario. So that impacts because plastics are such a complex issue to understand. It requires some understanding of chemistry and so on. So for the general public to vote in an informed way, this kind of education is necessary. So anyway, that's just one example of on the education side, what we do, and we see it as a really critical component or companion to the innovation work we do.
And how did you and Mary cross paths? I'm always fascinated by the people that she comes up with. You are another interesting and fascinating component.
I love to be surprised, like everybody else, how deep the conversations go. And Lina, you are a just an encyclopedia of information. I mean, it's just been amazing. We've learned so much, and I just want to thank you. And I have a feeling there'll be other conversations coming out of this. I feel like Ian's, got the wheels turning, and I know Dick's already thinking, when can I have my next conversation with you? And those that couldn't make it today are going to be so sad. We'll make sure that it's available to them. But I just want to say, you all stay for just a second. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else. If you're seeing this anywhere else, iTunes, Apple, wherever it is you get your podcasts, go to frontrunnersinnovate.com. You'll get the bios and the contact information. We don't give out email addresses or phone numbers, but we do have LinkedIn profiles, that sort of thing on everybody you see here, and you'll be able to connect away. So thank you again, Lina. Wonderful presentation and conversation here. So thank you. And thank you to my co-hosts, Ian and Ambassador Swett.